dive 914 on mooring lighter Yardcraft 8. This was a dive in Portland, England from August 2026 and was part of Clidive's weekend trips. This dive site was known locally as the Pin Wreck and remained unidentified for a very long time. However, in late 2024, it was successfully identified as the Admiralty-owned mooring lighter Yardcraft 8. We tried to shot on the wreck. I think we were slightly off it, hitting this ledge, but we did manage to find this Cuttlefish and this field of common starfish here as we made our way over to the wreckage, which we could see in the distance. We started with this anchor here. This one is fully exposed and intact. And then as we pan over to the left, there's a second anchor here. This is either a smaller anchor or potentially partially buried. Making our way around the outside of the wreck and along the outer hull here, we start to see some of the interesting features. Here on this pin was, I think, a bronze ring, as you can see by the colour of it. And here we have an edible crab that is out in the open, doesn't seem to notice me approaching there. Panning up here, we have one of the boilers, and in the distance there, sticking upright, is the mechanism. So the mooring lighter was used to install and repair the moorings for large ships by the Royal Navy, and it is thought that this mechanism here is part of that. And there are potentially copper or bronze plates there on the ground, as well as a deck pin which looks to be drawn in some fabric into the ground. There we have a very large cog, which we'll come back to later in the dive. And here is the outside of one of the tanks, which just sits to the left of the machinery we saw before. Quite a lot of bib here around on the dive. Here we have some red fabric, which was on the seabed in the wreck. And here we have a slightly different shot of the boiler as we've moved round and panning up there to that mechanism again. So it's thought that the sort of main wheel above us here is the worm wheel, and then above that, at the very top, is potentially a capstan. Here you can see lots of bib sheltering by the shelter that this bit of the wreck creates. You can see there's a little bit of current flowing here as we go up towards the top, and the top of the wreck sits at about 24 meters. Again, not sure exactly what all of this did, but it's thought that it was used for the moorings, potentially winding and unwinding ropes in the mooring lines here. And starting to make our way back down, we've got the large worm wheel here again. And here we start to go back over the rest of the wreck. So all these sort of rocks and deposits here next to one of the big tanks. Again, the bib that is around the wreck. And just there at the end of the shot, I think, was part of a winch. Here we have a rather large edible crab that was out in the open. Didn't seem too fussed by me as I approached with the camera. And continued moving around slowly as I was watching it. There we have one of the deck pins that the wreck was originally named the Pin Wreck after. Those are bronze, so we're starting to oxidize now, having been down for over 100 years. As we pan past the second of the tanks, we have these two upright posts that create a sort of H pattern, and there is another deck pin, this one more obvious than the last one. Having a look around the far side of the ship now, more schooling bib around us, and then making our way down past the two tanks again. I was on my rebreather for this dive, so the fish are not very scared by any bubbles or anything like that. Some large chain hooks there, I believe, and sort of assorted machinery on the bottom as we come back towards that large cog we saw earlier. Again, there it is a bit closer, so you get a bit of better detail here. Here is a piece of wood on the ground, so I think that was probably part of the original deck, or maybe the outer hull construction. And then as we finish up our dive, here is two more deck pins, I believe. You can see the two layers of the deck itself they kept together. And then we finished off back at the anchors before deploying our DSMBs.